The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. And on today's episode, we're going to take a detailed look at the unfortunate events that have happened in Uvalde, Texas. This is an unfortunate event for all of the victims' families, and there's no real words that will be able to convey the sorrow that society feels for the unnecessary loss of life of those children. This episode is not an episode to point out about the racial difference of the shooter compared to the unfortunate events that happened in Buffalo. This is not a conversation that has anything to do with race. This is not a conversation to stoke up any type of fear or division. It is only looking at the facts of how politicians are using these unfortunate events to further push their chosen agendas. That being said, let's take a look at the unfortunate incidents. We'll start off with a particular individual by the name of Gerald Butts. He's a Canadian, and just mere hours after the unfortunate events, he tweeted out, and it's at GM Butts on Twitter, "People don't kill 21 people in an eye blink. AR-15s do. Hashtag it's the guns." Gerald Butts is a friend of the Prime Minister of Canada and had to step away from his post in the Prime Minister's office over serious allegations of corruption and fraud. Jagmeet Singh, Canadian politician, at the Jagmeet Singh on Twitter, quote, "Children deserve more than thoughts and prayers. They deserve protection and safety. They deserve life. Like so many of you, I am heartbroken by the tragic news of a mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Texas." This particular tweet, where he references they deserve protection and safety, is in reference to gun control. The NDP in Canada, as well as the Liberal government, are strong advocates of more gun control and more restriction, so far as to ban handguns from use in Canada. Now, to go on to some American politicians and how their reaction. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted hours after the incident, "On the day of a mass shooting and weeks after news of Roe, Democratic Party leadership rallied for a pro-NRA, anti-choice incumbent under investigation in a close primary, robocalls, fundraisers, all of it. Accountability isn't partisan. This was an utter failure of leadership. TX28 is an extremely close race. If Seller wins, leadership's decisions to go to the mat for a pro-NRA incumbent will be the reason why. If Cisneros pulls out, they will have mobilized against the badly needed grassroots for November and fought against historic victory. And for what? The last time leadership waded in to save him, he thanked them by obstructing the party's signature legislation, paving the way for child tax credit to collapse and imperiling millions while taking victory laps for it. We can't afford to reward such acts. We can do better." Moments after this tragedy. And if you're noticing a pattern, it's the politicization of this unfortunate event. And I think what the worst particular tweet about this unfortunate situation was from the Vice President of the United States, at Kamala Harris. "Our hearts break for the people of Uvalde. Enough is enough. As a nation, we must have the courage to stand up to the gun lobby and fight for sensible gun safety laws to ensure nothing like this happens again. And in this particular tweet, they added a little bit more, and I'll play the audio at this point in time.
Enough is enough. As a nation, we have to have the courage to take action and understand the nexus between what makes for reasonable and sensible public policy to ensure something like this never happens again.
Now we can keep on going with more examples of Twitter highlighting how gun lobbyists are the ones that are responsible, how the NRA is responsible, how gun owners are responsible. But let's look at the facts of what happened in Texas. So we know on the 24th of May, a gunman attacked an elementary school in Texas, and he killed at least 19 children and 2 teachers, and injuring his grandmother beforehand. What's known, he was 18 years old. We know the race. We know that 21 victims are dead. 2 adults, grade 2 teachers, 19 children. He was armed with a rifle and a handgun. He was wearing body armor. He opened fire at Robb Elementary School. The gunman was stopped by a single Border Patrol agent who had been working nearby. Now, from the politicians reacting to these horrible events and referencing the shooting that happened at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, referencing unfortunate incidences such as Sandy Hook, talking about Columbine, the Las Vegas shooting, the shootings in the theaters. But one thing you have to keep in mind is that in 2021, there were an estimated 1.6 million uses of firearms in defense situation. Now, from CDC data in 2020, it showed that only 19,384 gun homicides had occurred in America. So when you look at the act of saving or using a gun in a defensive manner, outweighs the amount of times that guns are used in aggressive manners, such as a homicide or in mass shootings. If we look at mass shootings as a whole, 94% of mass shootings take place in what's referred to as gun-free zones. That information, the information about the use of defensive situations, can be found at SRN, papers.ssrn.com. We have the information when it comes to mass shootings is taken from crimesearch.org. The state of Texas has a law in place that prohibits possessing a firearm on school grounds. That's taken from giffords.org. Now, going back to the vice president's comments about the gun lobbyists. Well, we know that there's not a single gun lobbyist shot anybody. We know that the gun lobby itself is less influential than quote-unquote leftists portray. So when you hear Kamala Harris saying it's time to stand up to the gun lobby and to fight for sensible gun safety laws, gun lobbyists spent a total of $15.8 million in 2021 lobbying the government. That's from Open Secrets. So $15.8 million. Now, if we look at insurance companies spent $153 million to lobby the government. Electronic companies have spent $159 million lobbying the government. And in 2021, The largest lobbying group happened to be $356.6 million spent to lobby the government, and that was the pharmaceutical industry. So when they're saying we need to crack down on gun lobbies and the money that's coming in from gun lobbyists, $15.8 million is a small fraction of what the pharmaceutical company is paying at $356 million, the electronics company at $159 million, and the insurance companies at $153 million. Now, one other unfortunate situation of when these horrible attacks occur, America seems to be singled out. However, we have to look at Canada as well. Canada has had a few shootings in a country that has restricted handgun use to a point where it's nearly impossible to own a handgun. On May 23rd, 2 people had been shot, 7 police were injured at a party at a beach located in Toronto during some celebrations. In 2019, a shooter had walked in to a shopping mall and shot people in the city of Toronto. August 29th, 2021, shots were fired in Yorkdale Shopping Centre in Toronto. What Toronto in the province of Ontario has, and in the country of Canada, has some of the strictest gun laws in the world, but yet faces a serious problem with illegal firearms. So when you're looking at the argument to say we need tighter restriction, we need to take guns away from people, and guns are evil, and no one can own guns, guns still make their way into criminals' hands. And this is the part that's most important that politicians fail to understand. Criminals do not follow the laws. Criminals do not respect the laws. Case in point, the shooting in Buffalo was purchased a legal gun, but the shooter modified the gun, meaning it would have been illegal to sell the gun in that state, in the state of New York. In the province of Nova Scotia, April 2020, 22 people were shot and killed by 2 handguns and a Colt law enforcement carbine that were obtained illegally and smuggled into Canada. Follow more of that story, and that's from globalnews.ca. Nova Scotia shooting, illegal firearms, and you'll be able to find that information online to read that for yourselves. Having stricter laws does not stop people from obtaining illegal firearms. And this is a thing that politicians fail to understand. Go back to the 1.6 million uses of firearms in defense and the way that they've saved a situation versus the 19,000 people that have been killed by gun violence. Moving on to some other claims. Common sense gun control would prevent the shooting. Texas already requires background checks. And that's searched by the FBI. That's from USA Today to read those sources. Customers at licensed gun dealers in the state of Texas are required to pass an FBI background check. Other talking points from politicians is you'll hear that assault weapons are to blame. President Joe Biden made reference to assault weapons. Gun violence has been on a downward trajectory before 1994 ban, and that's according to Pew Research. And it's continued to fall even after the ban on assault weapons had expired in 2004. Handguns still account for more deaths than, quote, assault weapons each year, according to Pew Research. 59% attributed to handguns and only 3% attributed to rifles of any sort. Banning high capacity magazines won't stop mass shootings as well, because states that have those bans in place already are New York, California, New Jersey, and Colorado, where mass shootings have happened. Simply banning something does not mean it will stop. Case in point, the situation in Buffalo. Mass shootings still occur in all the places. So, Brooklyn subway terrorist, the church shooting in California, the Bridgeton, New Jersey incident, and Boulder, Colorado. Now, politicians will always come back to the Second Amendment rights and the right to bear arms, and will make the comparison to say that military-grade weapons or assault weapons are not what the Founding Fathers had intended. However, it was what they had intended. They intended to ensure that the people have a way to protect themselves from the state. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment was written so that citizens could be armed if the need arose for them to form a militia to defend their rights. Unlike any other country in the world, the Founding Fathers recognized that institutions created by man can lead to very dark outcomes, and the people have every right to stop government when they've stepped too far. Looking to countries that de-arm themselves, and case in point to Venezuela, when Hugo Chavez took over and confiscated all the guns, it was only a matter of months before there were military attacks on their citizens. And then the regime that followed afterwards and the subsequent downfall. A nation where its citizens are unarmed is easily abused by the state. The gun itself is not a dangerous weapon. It's the people behind it. So how can politicians, lawmakers, look to find a solution to ensure the wrong person does not have access to these guns? Where can more be done to ensure that mentally ill people are kept away from society? I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant, and you have yourself a great week.
Dan, what happens every Thursday?
That would be DCR Droids Canada Radio.
And what time is it out on Thursday?
That's from 9 till 11 p.m.
Dumb question, where do you find it?
You find that at accessradio.ca.
And what's the best part?
It's free.